Welcome to Growth Island, your go-to podcast on how to be the best version of yourself. Now, let's join your host, Mess Freeze, as he interviews high performers and experts in nutrition, meditation, exercise, relationships, business, general health, and life's bigger mysteries.
Thanks for tuning in today. Today we're going to talk about something that's relevant for all of us. It is poop, the microbiome, which is one of the new hottest subjects in the health arena that's starting to show so much research and what we can actually do. Everything from depression to overweight to a lot of diseases. So I found one of the best experts in Denmark. She is the founder of something called GUTXY, which is a company that do some of these tests, and she has a master in bioinformatics. It is, of course, Sofia Popov I get in today. So Sofia, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
So just a little bit about your story and how did you get into the microbiome? What does that actually mean? I mentioned poop, but what is all of this?
Yeah, so I'm originally from London and I studied in Leeds. And during these studies, I came across this book called Missing Microbes. And this was all kind of a couple years ago, and I really, my interest began there. And it was also particularly because during my teens, I would sort of have some ear infections and some other things. So then I had to take antibiotics. And then when this all came around, I was very sort of intrigued about, okay, what happens if you're taking antibiotics? What effect does this have later on? Because if we have this whole community, our microbiota, what does it actually mean in the long term? And so then when I moved to Denmark to complete my master's, and then I sort of, in the final year, I took a course on the microbiome and was still interested, and then I wanted to test it myself. And I ended up trying two of the sort of services that were available around this time, the pioneers Ubiome and American Gut. And I thought that there could be more practical value out of this because they only sort of gave you the sort of relative abundance. And I thought there must be something else that you can take to kind of figure out, okay, what can you improve in your diet and lifestyle? And so this is where sort of GUTXY came about, because also there wasn't anything in Denmark where it was possible to do this. And I really wanted to see that happen.
Cool. So microbiome, what does that mean? What is that?
So microbiome, usually it's microbiota and microbiome, but a lot of researchers, they sort of use it interchangeably. And we've also, because we found a lot of people, they kind of get scared off by the words. They're not sure what it is. I think also because it's such an early field, there still needs to be more time. But microbiota is this community, and then the microbiome is the genetic material from all these microorganisms that we have. And so we have different microbiomes, in our skin, the gut, what we focus on, and of course every sort of facet, like you have an oral microbiome, you have on the lungs. And so now it's a very exciting field where we're figuring out more about what's going on. And there's so many different microbes and, in comparison to the human cells. And one thing that's really intriguing and a bit also, confusing in a way is that there's so many that are unidentified. So we know that something's present, but we don't really know what they do. And that's what this world of microbiome science is really trying to unravel, because, you can have the name, but you don't know what they do, or you can just know that something's going on, but you don't have the specifics yet. So.
And how is this useful for our life? Yeah, why has this suddenly become such a big subject? Like when you go to a health conference or anything else, you hear about microbiome.
Yeah. Well, I think particularly if you consider how even, decades and decades ago, sort of more ancient, they were talking about how the gut is, the pivot, the start of everything. And if you look at it also more holistically, it's very central. If you're not digesting something properly, other parts of your body aren't functioning equally as well. And so really that's where we saw, so with the gut, it's key for everything. And, if we consider also the genome evolution and everything DNA, the difference is, for instance, if you're just, sequencing your DNA, you can kind of find these like SNPs or, what your genetic material is, but then you don't know, it's sort of only with epigenetics after years and years, it can have much of a direct impact. But with the microbiome, research has shown it's very rapid. Up to 5 days, if you change your lifestyle quite dramatically, you see a difference. But this is also where it can get a bit interesting and challenging in that, so many parts of our lifestyle affect our composition. So, the way we were born, these first 3 early years of life, kind of stabilize and create the sort of foundation for what your microbiome will become.
And that's also what we're learning now, that it's not so bad that kids actually get some bacteria, right?
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the things with this sort of clean hypothesis and that was combined with the antibiotics, like getting rid of everything, and then all these antibacterial sort of soaps and this, you're just sort of wiping it out. And now, researchers are really kind of encouraging parents to sort of let your kids play with soil, let them, have pets, because it will overall boost their immunity and support, their health.
So how do we use this? So there's a lot of diseases where microbiome tests are being used.
Right now, there isn't a sort of a definition or a complete sort of healthy microbiome. What we know is we have the correlations. So in a given state, so for instance, if someone is obese or if they're at a normal healthy weight, we can see what are the sort of general patterns. And the same goes for a lot of diseases. So right now it's really a game of associations. But what we believe is further on, we can really begin to start using it as treatment. So there's a lot more people trying to do these fecal microbiota transplants, people using probiotics and other other things like that, sort of in a way to kind of boost the composition. So if you think like probiotics, this is the sort of live microorganisms that you ingest. And then prebiotics, these are the sort of the food for these probiotics. And so now you see a lot of new foods coming to market where they're kind of the main marketing message is sort of, okay, here we have, probiotic bacteria in here, take this. And I think that's where we see a lot of it going. Particularly, it's become much more the norm for if you're taking antibiotics to be at the pharmacy recommended now probiotics to balance it. Of course, there's still research, and I think what people can sometimes find a bit, again, some uncertainty in the field is, for instance, there was a study where it showed, some probiotics, they weren't having an effect on certain people when they're taking antibiotics. And that's why it's really important to know that we all have our own microbial signature. And it's if we kind of get these data points for ourselves, then we can track it over time. And that's also to consider. I mean, if we're so unique and all our lives are reflecting in our health, but of course there are certain standards that should have a positive impact, but we still have to take into consideration that there's, these nuances that are very personal to us.
And so when we look, so you mentioned prebiotics and probiotics.
Probiotics, yeah.
So if we just prebiotics, we can also get that from food.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the main focuses we sort of have is we sort of encourage you to get it through foods. So if you think sort of Jerusalem artichokes, leeks, onions, garlic, they're sort of rich in these prebiotic fibers. And so if you sort of take that into your diet, you can sort of naturally boost. One of the issues we found is for people who have digestive issues such as Irritable Bowel Syndrome, IBS, which affects almost 1 billion people worldwide, for them and other people with digestive issues, it can be more challenging. So for instance, for them, like a lot of them, they can be aggravated by onions and leeks. And then it's kind of, sometimes there can be some sort of dysbiosis. So this is where there's an imbalance in the microbial community. And in this case, then there's a different protocol for them. And it's sort of, that's why we're kind of working with them and seeing what's a sort of better way to go. So again, it's not a one size fits all. And that's why I think for a lot of people, nutritional information can be very frustrating because it's, you get a sort of cookie cutter, like just eat plants, eat this and you'll be fine. But it's actually, there's a lot more to it. But of course, at the end of the day, is it about simplicity and sort of listening to your body and seeing what works best?
And then eating different things as well, right?
Oh, yeah, diversity, yeah. I mean, the one thing, a lot of people, they have their standard 5 or 6 meals that they repeat quite frequently. And I think from a microbial diversity perspective, it doesn't end up being the best. But of course, it still also depends. Like we've had people who, they have their same meals, but because, for instance, they had a very good childhood and upbringing, the stability of their microbiota was well established. So then they will naturally have a higher diversity. But for some people, if they've kind of had like too much antibiotics previously or something, it's more of a journey to kind of get them to a higher state.
Makes sense. But it's so interesting also when you said there's not like a one size fits all with
Yeah.
food. So I heard somewhere that I eat a lot of kale and spinach, but if you don't have the right enzymes in your stomach, apparently it's not the best for you because it doesn't break it down.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that, or is that something you come across as well?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends. It's also a case of sort of, like for instance, with people with beans or, that they say that it will flare up. And then also with kale, because it's very cruciferous, it's like you need to chew a lot. And I think then it's also a case of a lot of people, they eat quite quickly, they don't chew enough. And that's also sometimes why, it can be aggravating or they're not getting enough of the benefits from it. But it's also, if that's also the case, sometimes it's better for people to sort of juice a kale or something and get that through. But it's more, it's just seeing what works in that way. Yeah.
All right. So microbiome, how do we test it?
So basically, if we're taking the gut microbiome, so basically this is where you collect a stool sample. And we kind of, in our GUTXY kits, we have with a stabilization solution. So then it kind of freezes the sample so that it's at that given point in time. And also when you're taking a stool test, it's much better to take it at different parts of the sample for people to get a little graphic.
So for people listening out there, you can really enjoy that you can put these images in your head and imagine it. I actually had a microbiome test done as well. So I have some autoimmune diseases. And so I got that tested. So
how was your,
So that was an interesting experience. So you get this small kit, which is actually not that hard. There's something that you put on the toilet seat so that your poop can nice and easily hit that. And then you have a little spoon and a little cylinder that you put the poop down into. So it's supposed to be sitting on the toilet seat. Mine went down into the water. So I had the pleasure of pooping in my hand. So that was my first experience with the microbiome test. And then afterwards, I actually had my bike stolen when I got down to the street.
Oh, really? Wow.
I luckily had Undo, the insurance company. So got that. But it actually wasn't that bad.
But were you skeptical about it before? Or?
No, so I heard there's so much science coming out that this is really good to look at.
Yeah.
And I was surprised the first time I heard that I had to collect poop. I thought it would be really bad.
Yeah.
But learning more about it was actually a pretty easy process. The different things you got to do it was super easy, and sending it, you put it into this box so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And then you send it off.
Yeah.
And I had a dysbiosis.
So you found?
Yeah. So I got a lot of prebiotics and probiotics. That I had to take over 6 months, and then I had to stop because that meant that my stomach was supposed to be kind of stabilized.
And did you test again to check? Or?
I haven't been tested yet, so I probably have to get tested with GUTXY at some point to see if we can find the same. But it's pretty pain-free to actually do this.
Yeah.
If people are listening out there and thinking oh, this is so bad, don't worry, no one is looking, and it's not that bad.
No, I think it's in the beginning when I started, that was whenever I shared the idea, people were like, oh, but it's poop, oh my god, what is this? But actually, if you think, it's kind of like one of the staples, it's like blood, urine, stool, it's kind of. And if you don't know what's kind of coming out, that's one of you need to know how you're actually processing what you're taking in, because that's, one of the key markers, that's why people get worried if there's blood in the stool or something else, mucus, you need to be very aware. And I think it's just, for sure in the future, there'll be more time where it could be more, these sort of high-tech toilets and it's instantaneous and you don't have to look at it or something. But at this point in time, it's a really great tool to have. Because one of the key things in other ways is, it's really about preventing disease. And I think, medicine for so long, it's been focused on sort of, okay, something happens and let's treat that symptom, but then you don't know. And if you just consider sort of cancer, how many mutations and processes had to happen for that to take place, but you haven't seen it before. But of course, it's not, microbiome science isn't as a medical perspective right now. It's more for the curious and people who want to take a different approach and kind of have more of a, first look and sort of really test it out for themselves, and who really care about their health and are curious to find out. Because as the research continues to improve and improve, if you have this data now, you can really use it later and see, okay, what happened 10 years ago? How was my microbiome? Okay, how is it now? And then you can kind of have a sort of fresh take on it.
Yeah. And you can also, if you don't do a test to start with, because the poop is really, or the fecal the proper English word. If
so it's feces, fecal matter. There's different ways,
But in layman's word, the poop is really a window into your health. Yeah. So there's also this app called the Poop Tracker. Yeah. Where you can see that there's actually different measurement for what kind of poop you have.
So you mean the Bristol Stool Scale?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, so basically it's just like a standard scale where it's, I believe, from 1 to 7, and sort of around 4 or 5, this is kind of where you want your poop to be, like a nice sort of log. And then if you go either way, it's either gets too liquidy or it gets too hard and you're constipated. Yeah. And so I think for a lot of people who have IBS, they can kind of oscillate between sort of having, constipation, and then suddenly it's like almost diarrhea, and then they go back. But you really want to kind of get your digestion into that middle ground. But that's why also it is kind of important to keep track and sort of see, okay, when I ate that yesterday, how was my stool the next day? And that's why something like that tool is a good way to kind of, or just, jotting it down for yourself. And then you kind of have, and that's why also we do recommend, when people take a GUTXY test, we ask them to complete a survey when they take the sample and then tell us, what it was like. And we encourage them, particularly for Reset, this program that we do, like to keep sort of a journal throughout. And then they can kind of, when they get their final comparative results, they have an idea, okay, how was it actually? Because people, you end up being quite forgetful, like, oh, what did I eat yesterday? Or what happened with my stool? It's very easy to forget, so.
Definitely. You mentioned IBS again. Can you say a few more words? Because you mentioned 1 billion people actually have it globally. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that they have it. They just don't. Yeah. They're not living an optimal life. Can you say a few more words on that?
I mean, so for people, it's usually they kind of have irregular bowel habits. If it becomes more severe, then it's impacting their social life, where they're kind of, they have to miss a social event because they have to run to the toilet, or, it's a case where they're not going for a couple of days and then they feel kind of lethargic, they're not in a good mood. And as you even said in your intro, there's such this gut-brain axis. So if your digestion's not on track, you're not feeling happy and joyful, and you're not really living, your best experience. But for people who have IBS, it's just kind of being aware. And that's why even if you suspect it, like keeping a bit of a track of it, and then you can kind of see. If you go to the doctor, usually they have these sort of criteria that they will classify you with. But the case with IBS right now is there's no cause, there's no cure. So that's why we also kind of saw that a lot of people are suffering with this. The statistics for Denmark is up to 16% of the population. And so for them, we had so many people come to us and I went to the doctor and I didn't know what to do. They just told me either it's all in my head or, just manage it yourself. And because unlike something like irritable bowel disease where, you see something actually, in the test, and here there's nothing. If they do a colonoscopy, they can't see any inflammation or something going on. And that's the key sort of differentiator. And because there's no sort of, pills that they can take, it's kind of quite difficult for them to manage. And also because it's usually at a milder state, right? So they don't want to give them some severe drug that, would be given for something else.
Yeah, there are some pharmaceuticals out there, 5 years.
Yeah, there's some, but we heard there was more abroad. There's some here but you have to kind of go through a lot of loops to get it because they don't give it out regularly. Yeah. So most people, they're kind of just told to manage their lifestyle. And that's why we've been talking with Crohn's colitis, the association, and they've also kind of said the issue with sort of this lifestyle management and people not knowing what to eat when they have IBS. Yeah.
I know a startup called Zemedy with some super
I haven't
cool
heard
stuff.
of them. Oh.
It's a British startup that I work with in Berlin. So they're doing they are doing where they help people track with everything from meditation to mindfulness to yoga and eating. Oh, okay. So they're trying to actually help people there because it's supposed to be more efficient than several of the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, I think tracking, if you just keep it. The only thing is with the apps, you really got to make it into a habit because I think sometimes it can get tiring also tracking everything. But if you really, if you can kind of get the pattern going, then it becomes second nature. Yeah.
So how can we use this knowledge? If someone have IBS, what would you recommend that they do? How can they get help from a microbiome test?
Yeah. So this is the sort of mystery you have inside where you've kind of have these symptoms and you don't really know what's going on. You've been to try and seek other professional help, and you haven't found a solution. It's kind of, usually you're just dropped off at different sort of nutritionists or different programs and you're trying it out. And the only kind of support you usually have is just sort of anecdotal, or someone saying, thinking they feel better, but you're not sure. And then a period of stress comes in. So with the testing, what we usually recommend is, first, of course, seeing if doing your own research and seeing what you believe and what you want to do. And if there's something you want to try with a dietary approach. We have our snapshot. This is the one-time test where people just test and then they see what they've got and then they take it into their own hands. They get recommendations, supplements, everything. But what we found is people changing their habits and sticking to a program, it can be quite difficult. And so we developed this program, Reset, and Dietary Intervention Program. And so here's where, they do for 4 weeks, they change their diet. And at the start and end, they take a stool sample. So then their final report is actually, okay, what was the change that happened? So for instance, like we had an example with someone, Akromantia muciniphila, which is quite a beneficial, like that increased, and other ones like Lacnospira, Pectinchosa, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but yeah, it also increased. So like those kind of good gut boosters. And then sort of in this way, we also have a nutritionist on board, and she sort of suggests kind of what we think you could try as as your intervention. But of course, it's up to them. So if they kind of think, oh no, I want to try FODMAP. Oh no, I want to try plant-based. Oh no, I just want to take out gluten or take out dairy. This is a good way to kind of, you have the accountability and the supportive space. Because then okay, you don't really want to mess it up because you're going to get the second sample. And if you don't get it, you're not actually doing a proper science experiment on yourself. And I think that's really the key, because that's also what I found. There wasn't anything else like there where you kind of because then you're motivated. You're like, oh, I really want to know. And then it's only 4 weeks, 28 days. So it's not really a problem. Yeah.
Cool. And so you had some people that are going through this program right now, right? Yeah,
so right now we actually, so on Monday we had our second batch of resetters start. So yeah, we're very excited, and we kind of, we've given them the initial suggestions, and so now they're along the way. So throughout the 4 weeks, they get sort of our microbiome digest. So we send them newsletters and kind of give them more educational information, because we really think, with the new research coming out in this whole space, it's really about also, educating yourself and not just relying, even if whatever I say or someone else says, you should do your own research and decide for yourself, and not just, accept the opinion of someone who's kind of saying something. And that's what I think is key. And if people kind of do that, but we want to kind of create a community where then they can discuss between themselves and see what works. Yeah.
Cool. And how do you know whether a lab is good or not?
Whether it's good.
Yeah. So how do you know, you're in Denmark right now, but someone, for example, in the US or the UK or somewhere else that wants to do a microbiome test, how do you figure out a good provider?
I think the key thing that you have to look for is that if you do the testing right, it's best to use it with the same lab if you want to compare your results, because it's really they all use their different methodology. And now, of course, the Human Microbiome Project and all these initiatives, they want to create a golden standard, use all these kind of lab protocols. But that doesn't exist right now. So one thing is someone tried a uBiome test and from another company, and the results, it was the same day, but it was completely different. But the thing is, that will be the case if they're using different primers and other things in their, different machine, all this. And that's why it's really important to have that sort of repeatability yourself. And otherwise, it's sort of looking what actual information you want to get out, because different services, they focus on different things. So we're really our reports are very different to that of someone else. And so it's seeing what you actually want to get out of it. But it's then you have to kind of do your research into the specific service, because they all have a different goal. Some are more about, data collection and getting that. Well, for us, it's really, we want to create a program. And that's why it's more about, creating this intervention. So it's very different in that way.
And where can people go to find more information about all this microbiome testing and so on, if someone wants to go deeper into it? I know you're writing a really good blog.
Yeah, so we have our blog and our website, and we're very active on like Facebook. So we always share also their updates, and we have also some videos on YouTube. But I think one thing we recently started is also this group on Facebook, Microbiome Friendly Foods, because we really saw that people really wanted the dietary and nutritional information. And so here we kind of give them suggestions, how to increase lactobacillus through diet or bifida or what else. And that's really where we see that it can be very practical, because there's a lot of, like, for instance, yesterday we posted something on diabetes. There's this new research that you can get a sort of microbial signature that can predict, insulin resistance. But, this is if you don't have diabetes or something, it's very useful and to know, but it's not practical for your own life. And that's why it's like with the diet, then you really know, okay, if I'm eating lichen berries, this will happen. If I'm eating this will happen. And then you can kind of just do it. And then eventually maybe you want to see if it's having the effect you intended to.
And what other places can people go and look for information about the microbiome?
Well, I mean, the best place is like PubMed, just if you want to go for pure research. I mean, but if you're not a scientist, but that's where you get the core, because otherwise a good way is also, I like using like Google News and just kind of typing microbiome and then seeing what's up for the week, because usually you'll see like a news round of like the key findings. Like a lot of the journalists now, they really pick up on microbiome science. Otherwise, there's also a blog, I think it's called Microbiota for Gut Health or something. They also do a nice roundup. But I think, if you just go into the power of Google News, seeing what's out there, then you find all the latest research quite quickly. So
awesome. But it's really hard to like follow up with all the new research coming up on the microbiome.
That's why we try and distill it in our blog. Like we just kind of do these like pictures and then just a summary, because who wants to spend all the time reading it too much?
Makes sense. So are there any foods that we can say that are in generally really good for the gut?
Well, of course, the prebiotic rich ones, and like the ones
which ones could those be?
So like I said before, like the, artichokes, leeks, onions, but of course a lot of like berries are very good.
And why, of course, berries?
Why berries?
Yeah.
Well, because they just have a lot of phytonutrients, minerals, and then also, I can't think of exactly which now
But so strawberries is good?
Oh, you mean which of the berries? Yeah, no, all of them. So blueberries, blackberries, they're quite cancer protective, but also they have they're quite low calorie as well, so then very abundant. But it's the phytonutrients, and there's so many research showing, for instance, like blueberries, if you consume them, like a lot of these people who want to improve their memory, so like these memory champions, like they eat a lot of blueberries, like high amounts. So yeah.
And what about bread?
Bread. Which bread?
So white bread or rye bread or...
I think it depends on, that's very specific, right? I mean, there was new research where we're showing like different glycemic responses depending on the bread. I think if you're thinking, usually, white processed, like white flour isn't very good. I would say more like if you were looking into a longevity. So if you think like people like from Okinawa or something where they're kind of eating these purple sweet potatoes and different sweet potatoes, like that's really, linked like a good source of starches to kind of really boost. But I mean, with bread, it really depends on the person. I know there were like some Danish studies as well looking into rye bread and stuff, and people can look that up. But it also depends what you want to focus your diet on. So
makes sense. What's something that surprised you in this journey?
In the whole journey? Well, I think in what particular way do you think like?
So in regards to this microbiome stuff that you learned or stuff that you were surprised about how things were doing?
I think one key difference was in the beginning, I sort of had this perception of, what was a healthy diet. Of course, a lot of plants, and that still no one says vegetables aren't healthy or something. But I think it was more if you've kind of lived a certain way, and if your gut integrity is compromised in some sort of way, then it's a different kind of journey and approach you have to take. So it's not just, usually it's just down more vegetables, down something else, and just get the good stuff. But it's actually, you have to restore your gut to a certain point. And so sometimes for people, it's more, consuming more liquid foods and more kind of slowly, gently, like more cooked foods, steamed sort of vegetables, like slowly. And sometimes, the raw fruits vegetables, they can be aggravating. So it's more seeing that it's kind of, there's these nuances and you got to see where the gut is at a given time and then adjust and move from there.
And what about the whole fermentation?
Fermentation.
That's supposed to be good for the gut. Is that true or not? Or?
I think it depends. Like, of course, there's a lot of commercial products. We also do recommend for some people, like, sauerkraut, different sort of, there's kefir, kombucha, all of this. But I think it also depends. I think with some of these commercial products, like, they have a lot of sugar and salt, and that can sometimes negate some effects. So I think it's also really good. Like, for instance, Noma has a fermentation book, and if you can ferment your own vegetables, that's like probably the best way to go, because you don't know how much they've processed something and what's happened. But of course, for convenience, sometimes it's good. But I know in like Sweden, there's more like sauerkraut kind of available in the local stores. Here, there's like some certain ones, but not as much as in other places. So
fermented food is generally good if you make it yourself for the gut.
Well, overall, like, I think it's still generally like you will get this beneficial boost and you're getting, the bacteria, but it depends on the person. So it's, and what are they kind of missing, because you can also get it from just eating fresh foods as well. But generally, it is a good idea. But I don't think, again, one size fits all isn't like a thing. So, yeah.
So let's say, okay, I want to eat some healthy food. I'll try with some berries. I'll try and get some fermented food, but it's still hard. You still have this dysbiosis. How do you find good prebiotics, probiotics?
I mean, probiotics, yeah.
How do you find the good stuff? Like, how do you know? Because there's same with supplements. There's a lot of supplements that's really crap if the producer is not good.
Yeah, I mean, like once, a doctor told me as well, like it was really, if you're thinking of a probiotic and, you have to open the jar, usually you're like, every time you open it, you're just losing the bacteria. So usually you don't want it like that. It's best if it's actually kept in like a sachet or something. So it's like a one use and it's enclosed. So when you see those
like a pill.
Well, there's actually VSL number 3. That's one of the most potent and scientifically sort of documented. Like they come in refrigerated sachets and then you just use it one time and then you kind of mix it in water and you're good to go. Of course, some pills as well. But yeah, sometimes the ones where you're kind of opening it all the time, usually not the best. But I think it's also with probiotics, it's a case of kind of changing a bit because your gut gets used to something. So it's good to also have more diversity and see kind of what works better. But I mean, every sort of company kind of has their campaign for why theirs is the best. So you just have to do your own research. Yeah.
Fair. And what do we know about depression and the microbiome now?
Depression and there was a study that showed sort of 2 microbes were more diminished in the case. I think we had it on our blog. It's kind of not come to mind right now, but basically there were 2. So there is some sort of microbes that are, if they're depleted, then there'll be an effect. And of course, with the gut-brain axis, and, they kind of say, the gut is the second brain and all this. So there is definitely a connection. But I think most people will kind of feel it like if you're kind of constipated, you're not feeling good, as I said before. So, yeah.
Fair. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or GUTXY?
Oh, yeah. So just go to GUTXY.com. And then, of course, our social media handles at GUTXY Health. So you can find, if you just search, we're everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. So. And
it's definitely a good channel. I can vouch for that. I've been reading several of the articles and liking all of the stuff. Oh. So any final advice? Something that you already mentioned before?
Any final?
About how to be the best version of yourself, whether that be for your microbiome or something else?
I think definitely, one thing that's very key is sort of leafy greens. So if people really focus on those, I think that's like, you can't go wrong with like leafy greens. It's like so full of so much good stuff and it's good for the gut and everything. And I mean, one little hack that I also use is kind of like steaming. So like, for instance, with the kale and stuff you mentioned, like steaming kale or something and getting more an abundance of these plant-based foods and then kind of supporting your diet in other ways. But also just really also focusing a lot on mindfulness and stress, because also with the depression, anxiety, but it's very much, and we saw with people with IBS, like a lot of the time, if they're in periods of stress, that will affect their gut health and their digestion. So it's really keeping that, because I think if you don't have a mental game and that kind of first step, then anything else, even if you're just trying to intake more good stuff, it's not going to be processed in the same way because there's something going on mentally. So it's also having that belief, like, in yourself, and then like you can have the sort of the health that you want and envision, and then, your best life.
Makes sense. That's also very much in line with Zemedy, which is Josie and Elena is doing. So,
I'll check them out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they just came up with the app, so they've been working on this for a while. But they're very much into all this IBS.
Yeah.
And speaking very highly about doing a test as well to figure out how your microbiome is doing.
Yeah.
So it's great to see several forces out there making a difference.
Yeah. No, I think it's really. And I'm glad there's more people kind of realizing this, because then I think people really benefit from it in the long term, because everything, we all have our different sort of style and way of presenting information, and people resonate with different things. And even if a lot of the time, it's the same message, like, oh, go meditate or something, but you like it a different way, to hear it a different way. So yeah, it's really, yeah.
For sure. Well, Sofia, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It was great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Island. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes on how to be the best version of yourself. And if you found this show helpful, then please leave us a review so more people will learn about the podcast, or share it with a friend who can benefit from it too. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.